welcome to ABA Inside Track, the podcast that's like reading in your car, but safer. I'm your host, Robert Perry Cruz, and with me as always are my fabulous co-hosts.
Hey, Rob, it's Diana.
And it's me, Jackie. Hey.
Hey. Oh, I thought everyone was just going to start saying hey repeatedly, but
hey.
Hey, there we go. All right, good. Speaking of hey, tonight's topic...
It doesn't even make sense.
Well, it will make sense. I have to
hay.
finish my segue.
Oh, okay.
This is a podcast about behavior analysis and behavior analytic research, where every week we talk about a relevant topic in the field, discuss some relevant research articles. It's not a podcast about great segues. We're just trying these things out. They happen. Sometimes they don't. But speaking of, hey, I was chatting just a few minutes ago with our very special guest to talk about this week's topic, who mentioned, a recent, like a move out to some farm country. I was thinking of, hey, see, it was a great segue. You didn't give me time to finish it.
Okay.
But super special guest, Dr. Jamie Hughes-Lika, is rejoining the show after a brief hiatus, but not really a hiatus because you're a special guest. So welcome back, Jamie. It's great to see you again.
Thank you, guys. I'm so excited to be here. This is one of my favorite topics right now, so I am pumped. And I live in Iowa, so that's where the hay segue comes in with the corn in the field.
You know what? As long as our special guest gets the segue, listeners, that's all that matters to me. If you get it too, that's great. But it's really for our guests to have a fun segue. Yes. And that great topic is going to be naturalistic developmental behavioral interventions, a term that no matter how many times I read about it or we've discussed it, I can't remember how to say it. So I'll be looking at my notes a lot in this episode, or NDBI. And that is what we'll be talking about today. And everyone's very excited about this. Everyone comes with different, I was going to say baggage, but we all like this topic. So everyone comes with different fun memories of this topic. So Jamie, as our special guest, how did you kind of first get introduced to NDBI? Why is that something that you were like, yes, I would like to talk about that on a podcast tonight?
Yes, I would talk about this all day, every day. So I started out as a behavior therapist for a little boy with autism back in 1998 as part of a placement for one of my psychology courses. And I provided in-home ABA services for him, and trainers from CARD flew out to Iowa, where I also lived at the time, for monthly workshops. So I then graduated from university, moved to Denver, had an awesome supervisor who taught me all about Skinner's analysis of verbal behavior and really worked a lot on manding, capturing, and contriving motivation, and getting into that natural environment teaching. So of course I wanted to learn more. So I picked up a BCABA at some point back there. I think that was 2001. When you do this so long, you forget, it kind of blends all together. So wanted to learn more. I decided to pack up, move again to Columbus, Ohio to get my master's degree in ABA at The Ohio State University, studying with Tim, Bill, and Coop, which was really exciting, and learned a lot about Skinner's analysis of verbal behavior again with Coop. Wanted to learn more, took another move across to California to go work with Dr. Partington. So I've just naturally progressed towards more naturalistic types of ABA interventions as my career has kind of progressed. So was in California, learned about PRT, loved that, lived that for a bit, decided to move to the UK to do my PhD in intellectual and developmental disabilities, and did my dissertation on parent-mediated naturalistic developmental behavioral intervention for young children with autism. And when I was in England, that was about the time that a lot of the ESDM research started coming out. So I jumped down that rabbit hole because I was loving what I was reading, went and became an ESDM certified therapist back in 2017, I think. And now I'm becoming a trainer because I think this is such a really great model to push for young children with autism. I just firmly believe in it and can talk all day about how awesome I think it is. So that's what I've been doing. And I've been fortunate to work with Dr. Deborah Fine, who is my research rock star. And we did a bunch of research projects in Albania. I lived there for a bit. We should do a podcast about where Jamie has not lived, I think.
You're like from in San Diego, Jamie.
Yeah, I lived there for a bit too. So I really enjoyed doing that. And then I've just progressively been working with the 0 to 4 population over the past 10 years and developed a bunch of online courses about NDBIs for professionals to help them turn those knowledge into skills and really take it to the next level. And it's just crazy for me to think that I've been doing this almost 30 years, but it's such a wild ride. And I've got to meet so many amazing families and professionals like yourselves along the way.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Yeah.
That was a great synopsis.
Very good. Very good. And Diana, I know that you, in a past life, you were all about the EI. I know you're still all about the EI too. So this is a topic that you're also very, very passionate about.
Yeah.
I love
Do
it.
you want me to say more? Or no?
That story was a lot shorter than Jamie's. That was
Yeah, I mean, EIBI is the work that I did in the past. That's what I did my dissertation on, and I've read about and researched a lot on NDBIs, although I'm not trained in ESDM.
This is one of the many models, right?
Yes. We'll talk about a bunch of them.
And you brought up Deborah Fine, Jamie, and her book, The Activity Kit for Babies and Toddlers at Risk, is one of my absolute favorites. And
Yes.
I reference that quite a bit.
It's on the nightstand. I know, yeah.
It has actually been on the nightstand for a long time.
It's one of my favorite too. Our online training program that we did, that book is all full of those ideas. So it was so cool to see that out there. And it's relatively affordable, I think, for families.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's a great activity guide for parents and professionals who struggle to come up with naturalistic teaching ideas.
Jackie, what is your background in DBI? I don't think we've really talked about it too much. The two of us.
I don't really have a background in it.
I don't either. I think I'm gonna be the BCBA hipster and be like, NDBI, isn't that just like doing a good job? Does it really get its own label that's hard to pronounce and I can't remember it very well? That's my role tonight. So I'm very excited to maybe learn that I might be a little right, but I'm probably also not being very precise in my understanding.
Okay.
You know, Rob, after I was reading these articles, I am with you. I am also the hipster BCBA because I only ventured into working with younger children like recently through the mentorship of Diana, to be honest, because I never really did that. My work was usually with older kids. And so I learned a lot from reading these articles. So it was good for me too.
They're very thorough. So let's speaking of these articles, here's another segue for you. What articles will we be discussing tonight? These are guest choice.
Okay, so we have 3 articles that we're going to review for tonight. And they include Naturalistic Developmental Behavioral Interventions, Empirically Validated Treatments for Autism Spectrum Disorder by Schreibman, Dawson, Stammer, Landa, Rogers, McGee, Cassery, Ingersoll, Kaiser, Bruinsma, McNerney, Weatherby, and Halliday. That was published in the Journal of Autism and Developmental Disorders 2015. And that is like a who's who of NDBI research,
Yes.
that list of authors right there. We're also going to discuss, can the Early Start Denver model be considered ABA practice by Vivanti and Stammer? That was published recently in Behavior Analysis and Practice 2021.
I like those articles with a question, but they don't answer it in the title. So it's like, no, I better read this article.
Like, not sure.
The hook.
Can the ESDM be considered ABA practice? Yes, probably. Like, that's the bad title. Don't call it
I
that.
want to learn more.
Hang on.
It's very
We're
descriptive,
going to get to it.
you know. I guess it saves me some time, but not a great research title.
All right. And then this one is a multi-site randomized controlled trial comparing the effects of intervention intensity and intervention style on outcomes for young children with autism by Rogers, Yoder, Estes, Warren, McEachen, Munson, Roca, Greenton, Wallace, and Gardner. And that was published in the Journal
The Journal of the
American Academy
yeah.
for Childhood and Adolescent Psychiatry 2021.
I just had to look
This is one
that
where
one
they
up.
just give you the abbreviated title, and so I added some uhs and ofs and thus.
I was updating the website with that title recently, and they make you look for the full title of the journal. Like, they're not messing around.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't already know the title, you shouldn't be reading this journal,
Right?
sir.
Yeah.
Exactly.
What an embarrassment. Okay.
So,
Very exciting articles. I really can't wait to talk about them.
well, let's do it. So
Okay.
I guess the big question we should probably start with, because this is a topic that I feel like when our listeners, no matter their background, hear kind of some of the key components, they will all, do one of those bits. Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Mm.
But it's definitely a topic where I feel if you don't live it every day and you're just sort of occasionally read about it, it does, I think, some of the precision and some of the detail can get lost very easily and make it feel like this is just something that people do. Like, why does this have a title? So, Jamie, what's the elevator pitch? Like, why would you say, no, NDBI. It's a special thing. It's different than just using some of the techniques or some of the technology in the manual. Like what makes NDBI NDBI?
Yeah. And I think when we talk about interventions for young children with autism, looking at 0 to 3, I think we really need to consider using these types of approaches, which are NDBIs. So we've got NDBIs that draw from the field of behavior analysis, and the principles are grounded in our science. But they also draw from the developmental science, which gives us information about how children develop, how they learn, which skills are precursors for other skills, and so on. And I think that's really important because I don't know any graduate programs that are teaching us this. And this is something that when we are tasked with, as behavior analysts, to develop treatment goals and learning objectives, if we don't have this kind of context for how children learn and what that developmental trajectory looks like, that is potentially concerning. Because how do you know what's appropriate to pick or not? So I like to think about NDBIs as they're grounded by the science of ABA. They're guided by that developmental science. They're evidence-based. Some might argue they're not. They are. We'll talk all about that. And they can easily be integrated into the natural environment. But then I also feel like I have to talk about NDBIs are not letting the child have control of the intervention, following a child around and imitating the child, or imitating inappropriate behaviors. And I'm sure at some point we'll have a question about misconceptions of NDBIs, and I've got a whole list for you ready to go. So those are kind of what I think about when I think about what NDBIs are and are not. So when we think about the core components of NDBIs and the Schreibman article from 2015, Schreibman and crew, they do a really good job of laying out the 3 core components, which consist of the nature of the intervention targets or treatment goals and objectives. You could think about it that way. The context or the environment in which the intervention is delivered, and the instructional strategies used. So regardless of which specific NDBI model we're talking about, they all share those 3 core components. Mm-hmm. And then also in the Schreibman article, I think I made you guys some cool visuals I hope you can put up on the website, little charts and stuff that I think kind of keep it fun. Within that same article, we have those 13 different features that are common across them. And one of the things that I just love about NDBIs is all of these researchers on their own are coming to kind of the same conclusion about the same strategies. And these are all independent researchers. And they came together and wrote this kind of consensus statement article that brings it all together and suggests maybe we think about a new type of intervention called NDBIs, which I think is just exciting. Like, getting together, they all have their own avenues to profit and their own you know what I mean? Like, it's just really cool for them to come together and to put this article out there. So this is definitely a seminal paper to read if you want to learn more about NDBIs.
Mm-hmm. I thought it was an excellent overview. It definitely made me feel much more comfortable reading some of the other articles that we'll be talking about tonight in terms of just having an overview and I think a historical context. And Jamie, I did, I know kind of our list of like some possible questions. I did think maybe historical context would be sort of important to talk about because the more I read about NDBIs, the more it did feel like some of that dichotomy of like the NDBI versus just kind of straightforward behavioral interventions did feel like more of it came from just the history of the development of these techniques rather than sort of like, no, these are so different and you can't consider them the same thing at all. I mean, does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And I think if we talked about some of the primary NDBI models that are practiced today. So if we think of NDBI as an umbrella and that there are different models under that umbrella and they all kind of build on each other similarly but differently. So if we talked about enhanced milieu teaching, EMT, for example, that's one that a lot of people might not have heard of, but that's been around since the 70s. So, Betty Hart, all these guys' names, they're just popping around. So if we're talking about EMT, we have this naturalistic, conversation-based intervention that's using child interest and initiations for opportunities to model and prompt language. So milieu teaching, again, first described by Hart back as a collection of naturalistic procedures. And that was building on incidental teaching methods from Hart and Risley back in the 60s. So I feel like are we rebranding things? I'm not really sure where to go with this. So a lot of this stuff comes back to many, many moons ago, and it just keeps coming back again to a blended approach.
Mm-hmm.
Strategies from ABA that are blending in, for this one, natural language paradigm. And, this has been going on forever. The developmental strategies that are incorporated within that model are responsiveness, modeling, expansions. There's 20 years of support to go back for these interventions. And one of the names that I always see pop up is Ann Kaiser. A lot of studies that she has done about EMT. So if we talk about EMT, we also can talk about incidental teaching, the original pioneering work done by Betty Hart and Todd Risley. Mm-hmm. So that was then expanded by other researchers, Gail McGee and colleagues who came out with the Walden Toddler Program. That was back in the 90s. So I feel like for me, it always goes back to Hart and Risley. That just, for me, is my basis. And I just keep going back to looking at all of the amazing work that they did with these behavioral strategies, setting the stage for what I think now are NDBIs in our current setting here.
So, would you say that there would be, if you had to describe like a major difference between just like this is a traditional behavioral intervention versus an NDBI? Are there some areas that you say this is how they are going to be very different? Because I think in general practice, most people would read these articles and say, "Oh, I do that. Oh, I do that. Oh, I make sure to do that," even though they might not think of themselves as practicing an NDBI or using some of the kind of the conceptually systematic components of NDBIs. Would you say these are the big differences?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, the major differences between, I'm going to call it traditional ABA programs, because I don't want to say DTT because that's not representative of what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. So we'll just call it traditional if that's okay.
Sure.
So the major differences between traditional ABA programs and NDBIs, for me, relate back to those core elements of NDBIs. The nature of the targets, the context for the intervention, and the instructional strategies used. So differences in the environment for me is a big one. And I also think it's one of the big differences from previous forms of ABA. So we're talking about learning trials that are embedded within the activity as opposed to sitting down and using flashcards, running drills. Big overgeneralization there. Again, kind of take that with you will. So we want the child to have the opportunity to learn within the natural environment during these routines and activities in these socially meaningful, and I think that's important, child-led interactions with others. And these types of skills that we're working on, especially for young children with autism, they're not usually taught discreetly or in isolation. They should be occurring during the child's daily interactions, activities, and routines, as you would find in a 0 to 3 type early intervention program. I think one of the things that, and Diane, you can tell me this would be great to kind of talk about EIBI versus NDBI. One of the things that I find a lot are professionals who say, we do naturalistic environment training, we do teaching in the net. And for me, I think there's a big difference in doing DTT trials in a naturalistic type setting. And so for me, those are very different things. So if I was looking at a traditional ABA program in the net, the natural environment, I would typically see staff that would be choosing the targets, adult directed. Selection of those treatment goals might not be informed by developmental sequences. There might not be natural reinforcers used. And I really think it seems that behavior analysts appear to understand that NDBIs have a focus on the natural environment, but they're missing the perspective and the developmental teaching procedures that are utilized within NDBIs. All about that back and forth social reciprocity, child-led, shared control. That's a big difference for me for NDBIs versus traditional ABA programs. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe there's a misconception there that within that natural environment, the child is running the session. Mm-hmm. And that's not true. So we know there's a difference between child-run and child-led sessions. So
it's
if I was looking at
Montessori method, right?
Yes, no. So like child-run sessions, the child gets to do whatever they want. There's no support. There's no boundaries, just free for all. But when we're talking about child-led sessions, which you're going to see in NDBIs, we're valuing that connection over compliance. And we're joining in and expanding on their interest. And we're adding support and structure for the child's ideas and motivation. And we're setting limits and holding boundaries. I mean, I think that's a big difference. I think people see NDBIs as we just follow the kids around and do whatever. No, not true.
Yeah, so I can comment a little bit too. So in my, past experience, I at one point ran the home base program for the New England Center for Children, which was an under 3 age group who received services in home. And we used a very NET model, I would say, or it was an EIBI program, but a lot of it was structured the way that you're describing, Jamie. And when I had new teachers come to the program, we would run exercises with them on ways that you can set up the space that you're in to, create a child-led setting and opportunities for working on varied skills with a variety of toys that the children might enjoy. And we had an exercise where we would provide a commonly used toy in an environment and say, what are all the different ways that you could play with this toy with a child while targeting certain types of skills, right? So I might go into a home and look around and it just looks like everybody's playing, right? But because I know the background of what my clients' targets were, I could see how there were different built-in opportunities, right? So there might be a slide that went into a ball pit, right, in one corner of the room, and there might be a rice bin in another corner of the room, and there might be a farm with little farm toys, and there might be a bubble gun, right? And so the child could go between the different activities, and we did do some sitting down, right, in order to sort of isolate and focus with one another together, but not a huge percentage of the time. But the child could go around to the different activities. And when it was slide time, the teacher knew that they were going to practice together 1, 2, 3, go, and work on those types of, closed phrases. And when it was sand bin time, they knew that they were together going to practice scooping the sand, pouring the sand, stirring the sand, or whatever it might be. With the farm animals, they knew that they were going to practice together, trying to get some reciprocal imitation of different farm animal sounds. And with the bubble gun, they knew that they were going to practice social interactions, right? But if the child didn't want to do that during that time, that was fine. They'd find some other way to interact, and they would allow the child to get up and move to different activities as needed. Although for very young learners, sometimes the very first thing we worked on was sitting down and staying with a toy for even a few seconds at a time. So we would also work on trying to build up that response at strength.
Yeah, and that's hard for toddlers. I think that's a great point. That's where you start, is maybe just getting them to sit for 2 seconds because they have no butt to sit on and they're always on the go. Yeah. And if you think you're going to do a puzzle for 5 minutes, you have to reprioritize again, what is an appropriate toy for a toddler, and then a toddler with autism who, that you're working with to say, is that an appropriate thing? And you said reciprocal, and I love that. That's a huge component of NDBIs, this back and forth dance that we do between adult-led and child-led interactions. And, that is connection and communication. And And I love how you said that, we kind of honored that child's choice to get up and do something else. We talk a lot about assent and we do that a lot. And it's not following the child, it's following the child's motivation. And I think that we should do that in any program if we're looking to capitalize and really work with that motivation to get optimal learning. I think we have to pay attention to those cues and respect them regardless of how young or old our clients are.
So in hearing all of these descriptions and in reading the articles, there's a part of me that wonders, why do we even need an article talking about the Early Start Denver model? Is it ABA? Because it feels like a controversy that stems from maybe a history of certain practitioners being mad at each other versus an actual, significant distinction where we probably should set up, 2 different camps and really fight about these terms. And as I continue on in this field, I never thought I'd be old enough or stay in a job or a field long enough to say, you do realize that as time moves on, some people don't want to see change.
Some people don't move on.
And it's not because the science isn't there. Maybe it could be, and it may have been at one point, but it increasingly feels like maybe it's less the science isn't there versus the passion for change or the interest in doing things differently, or there's a nagging fear that I don't know if it really needs to exist. Is that kind of what we're talking about here? Because spoilers on is ESTM and ABA program, they go through the 7 dimensions, and we can go into it in more detail, but it pretty much is just check, 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 check. We did it. They all check off all the boxes. I mean, is this a manufactured controversy, or just something of just the time, or is there something I'm completely missing, like a context I don't have?
I'm sure there's some backstory that I'm probably missing as well. So if we think about are NDBIs ABA or not, I think it depends on who you're talking to, their theoretical perspective, experience, training, mentors, etc., and what viewpoint you're trying to make. I think you could argue it both ways. So I love the article, the 2020 article by Vivanti and Steamer that they put out. Again, can the early start Denver model be considered ABA practice? Question mark. Read on. And just like you said, the article examined whether it meets the parameters to be considered.
I blew up their spot too by saying that yes,
it was as identified in that Bear, Wolf, and Risley 1968 article. So they come to the conclusion that ESDM, which is one of the models under that NDBI umbrella, can meet those parameters and should therefore be situated within the ABA landscape. So they talk about how the ESDM main points, again, tick off all of those 7 dimensions. They talk about how it qualifies as practice for ABA as compared to the, the ABA treatment for ASD guidelines, which is now managed by CASP. I used to be under the board. Mm-hmm. They compare it to that. Thank you. And then they talk about how we want to think about adapting interventions to the client's needs as identified in the PECC, I think it's 2.09, which talks about treatment efficacy and intervention efficacy. So they come to the conclusion that it should be, maybe part of the confusion is related to a quote unquote translational issue. So like NDBI models do not use as much ABA lingo, right? Mm-hmm. Which could make things look conceptually fuzzy. However, the use of that lingo, that easily understood language, is meant to support that collaboration, which you should have in a 0 to 3 program across a multidisciplinary team. It's designed to help promote the dissemination of the model. It's to help increase implementation across settings, as well as seek that acceptability, right, that social validity of parents and providers. We're trying to get that buy-in there. So, but if you picked up an ESDM manual, if you had that blue book right next to you and you thumb through the index, I believe you will find antecedent, behavior, chaining, prompts, engagement, gestures, and I could go on. So
I know those words. Yeah.
I don't.
I feel more comfortable now. Oh, thank goodness.
I don't understand the confusion regarding the terminology sometimes because we're talking about the science. So if you know the science and what we call it, you kind of read the room and adapt it to your audience. It'd be no different than if you wrote a behavior plan for a professional versus one that's more user-friendly for a parent. We have a lot of talk in our field about our terminology not being as user-friendly, and I think NDBIs don't have that as much.
Jamie, I have a question that I've always wondered, and I didn't find the answer in the articles, but do you think that people, maybe those that are not behavior analysts that work in NDBI, like maybe are only working in the Early Start Denver model, maybe they don't want to be associated with ABA?
I could see that. Yep. I think that's where it kind of comes back from your background and conceptual. Right? Yeah. Like, do I want to be ABA? That's got a lot of controversy with the neurodiversity movement right now. Do I really want to stick my foot in that pond? No, I'm going to row my boat over here.
Right. Yeah. You're like safer over here and people love this.
Yeah, that's a great question. Definitely. I think it, depends on your, was it Hanley that had today's ABA? He posted something.
Sure.
Yeah. Progressive ABA, what's his name? Was it Ron Leaf? No, Justin Leaf. I think progressive ABA, clinical. There's a lot of people that are out there really talking about assent and consent and happy, relaxed, and engaged and all the stuff we do in NDBI is just as a given working with the little ones that we do. But I definitely could see I don't want to associate with potentially some types of ABA programs that might not be as progressive. Not all, for certain. There's some amazing, amazing programs out there. And there might be some behavior analysts that don't want to go into the naturalistic developmental pond because it's too fuzzy and, you know what I mean? It's too non-technical and it doesn't look as data-driven. But I promise you to be an NDBI that B is for the behavior, which we're looking at for the data. So it has to have data for it to be considered an NDBI type model. And tick off those 13 features and share those 3 common core elements.
Do you want to be a BCBA?
Sure, we all do.
Now you can come to Regis College in Weston, Mass. to get your graduate degree.
Choose from any one of these courses.
Masters of Science in Applied Behavior Analysis.
Masters of Science in Special Education.
Dual degree in Special Ed and ABA.
Or be eligible for your postmaster's certificate.
You can complete your degree and be ready to sit for the exam in 2 years. And our 2017 grads had a 100% pass rate on the BACB exam.
Come enjoy practicum placement support, ethics mini handbooks, PhD-level professors, small class sizes, and a service trip to Iceland.
If interested, don't delay. Supplies are limited. Learn more at regiscollege.edu.
Again, that's www.regiscollege.edu, regiscollege.edu. One more time, www.regiscollege.edu. See you there!
Hey everyone, quick pause in our conversation just to remind all of our listeners that ABA Inside Track is ACE and QABA approved. By listening to the show, you're able to earn 1 learning credit. All you need to do is finish listening to the show, then go to our website, abainsidetrack.getceus, or you can click the link in the show notes on your podcast player. No matter how you get there, though, you're going to need the 2 secret code words to get credit for listening. I'm going to give you the first one now. These are special guest code words from Dr. Hughes Lika. And the first is play. PLAY, whether you're referring to the action that you do as part of NDBI in a lot of your sessions, or whether you're referring to a staged performance of something like, Our Town or whatever. Either way, play is your first code word. All right, let's get back to our discussion. Kind of speaking that idea, the terminology and the kind of the background information, I sort of liked how Vivanti and Stammer kind of discussed that idea when they were looking at is ESDM specifically conceptually systematic, and really that idea of it's coming from a background of behavioral science, and it's complementary to the developmental science. And I suppose for some folks that idea of behavior analysis sort of complementing something else might seem odd depending on what field they're in, or if they've mostly they work very specifically in just like pure behavioral interventions for, older students or adults with autism in the past. But like for myself, coming from, education or special education background, I feel like, well, you should have, why wouldn't you have these complementary sciences that relate to human behavior that you might want to know more about, and then decide how does that fit into your own personal model. But I did find that interesting. These are like the 2 great tastes that go great together sort of idea.
Absolutely. And I think it's helpful to understand that other applications of behavior analysis, such as OBM or acceptance and commitment therapy, they combine behavior analytic principles with an understanding of business principles and therapeutic relationship processes. So shouldn't the goal for intervention for very young children with autism be the same? Incorporating an understanding of child development to inform the goals and to work with those goals within that varied context, the activities and daily routines using developmental strategies that are appropriate and influenced by developmental science. So for me, working with toddlers with autism is almost a subspecialty. It's a totally different game to work with a 2-year-old than a 3.5 or a 4-year-old. And I think NDBIs just stack the deck for you to set you up for success of bringing this amazing developmental science to get those strategies there. And then behavioral principles are intertwined as well. I don't see them any differently now. And I try to think back from my early days with, CARD way back in the day when it was a very traditional type approach. And I've just morphed continually along the way. The more I narrowed the focus to younger and younger children, the more NDBI focused I became. And I think that it was just kind of a natural progression of working with that audience or that client population, if you will.
Mm-hmm. So the article speaks specifically about ESDM as ABA, and the answer being yes. But I mean, and I know ESDM is your bag too, but would you say that, if someone were to write the exact same article, is Skirts considered ABA, or is Jasper considered ABA, or any of the other, we haven't gone over all the various.
You say skirts?
What is it supposed to be?
I say certs.
Certs. I was going to say, that was my least favorite one just because I was like, Skirts. Ugh, I'm not buying. That's a terrible name.
I love that book, Uniquely Human, as well, actually.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that on my reading list.
I have my ASD class read it.
They use Skirts?
The book is about certs.
Certs?
Yeah.
Like the breath mint.
Yeah.
Oh, yep. Wow. I didn't know it was that effective.
I don't know, if you bite into a certs in the dark, does it make a spark? That is an empirical question.
Well, those are lifesavers, though. Certs do not.
Do you know that for sure?
Oh my God, you're right. Whoa. This episode's just blowing my mind already.
I think it depends on the NDBI. I don't think certs.
Way to bring it home.
I got me saying it wrong. I think certs.
Is it certs? I said it wrong. Okay, they need to work on that title.
I don't know that they would call themselves ABA.
No.
Right, but when we talk about the 7 dimensions of behavior analysis, you don't have to call yourself ABA to fit into those dimensions. You're just doing behavior of learning.
Yeah, maybe they would have they might have effective. It might be an effective intervention. They might tick off some generality. Maybe there's a manual that would tick off conceptually systematic. I don't know about the behavioral or analytic component or technical. That one, is that Amy Weatherby and Barry Prinze? I feel like I haven't looked at that model in many moons. It doesn't fall under the NDBI arena because it's not ticking off one of those 13 essential features, but it is definitely a developmental based approach. And there are some really cool aspects about communicative intent for little ones and early kind of pre-linguistic stuff. Amy Weatherby's got some great stuff on that for all of her first signs and first actions. And what does she have? The SORF, systematic observation of red flags. She's got a really cool.
Oh, okay. I didn't know about the SORF.
That's a funny acronym, though.
SORF, yeah. This is the episode of acronyms.
Really?
Yeah. But I think you could create a checklist, take those 7 dimensions and analyze, Jasper or PRT for sure.
PRT for sure.
Yeah. Early Start Denver Project Impact is a really cool one from Brooke Ingersoll. I think any of the ones that have a BCBA that are helping to develop it probably are adhering to a lot of that behavioral principle integrated within it. Yeah, for sure.
And the big differences between the different acronyms of NDBI programs really is more, the kind of the focus of the targets, whether it's some are family oriented, some are more child oriented, some are more about the communication or social piece versus looking at all the aspects of, behavioral interventions or NDBIs might target, overall, right? Or are there other big differences between them?
That's a great synopsis. Yeah. So Project Impact, improving parents as communication partners, I believe is the acronym. That's
a good acronym. That sounds Project Impact. Ooh, I want to be a part of that project. Sounds like it works.
Yeah, and it's great for behavior analysts that are looking for a parent training curriculum. They have a whole kind of package out there in their book. I believe is in the 2nd edition. It's got a book for instructors. It's got a parent homework book with application exercises. I think there's video vignettes as well. And their whole focus is on training parents as providers, which is great. And she's got a ton of research. She's a powerhouse researcher, Brooke. And if we looked at Early Start Denver model, that's really a comprehensive model. Right. So we're looking at all of the different items and all of the different areas to develop versus Jasper, my new favorite one that I'm really getting into, is not a comprehensive program. It's focused on social communication, play, engagement. So Jasper being joint attention, symbolic play, and emotional regulation. And they've got some amazing stuff in their new book. I believe it came out this summer. Jasper, if you Google it, it's got little robot cartoon thingies on it. Jasper model. I think
Connie Cassery?
Yes, ma'am. Yep. And they have a lot of stuff in the book about regulation and kind of working within some of those restricted and repetitive patterns of behavior. It's brilliant. It's such a helpful guide, I think, for people who are struggling to support a child with autism who might have a lot of those I guess maybe interfering behaviors. I don't know what to call them. That might slow down the learning or prevent them from connecting and interacting and engaging with others. I don't see very many books that addresses that head on. So it's the very back of the book. It's a great, great book for sure. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think they all, again, have those, if they're under the NDBI model, they have those 13 common features. So they have that 3-part contingency, clear procedures, fidelity, developmental sequences, ongoing measurement. There's got to be child initiated, environmental arrangement, natural reinforcement, adult prompts and scaffolding, balance turn, modeling, adult imitation, and broadening that attentional focus. So those are the 13 features identified in the Schreibman article. So all of the NDBIs should tick those boxes. But then I think they have their own little individual unique aspects as well of how they are different from other models, but the same.
So Jamie, if I were, I like listening, well, I am listening to you describe these, but if I were someone in their car,
paying attention.
if I were someone listening to this episode later and I said, or, I'll just use myself as an example. I said, you know what? I love that. I love the articles, talk with Jamie, just maybe even more jazzed about NDBIs. I mean, what would be the reason that you might suggest I don't or do, I'm going to go get the ESDM book and I'm just going to maybe pull some of the sections that I like the most or pull some of the procedures. I mean, is that something that one could do and still be sort of staying within their competence, providing, meaningful instruction? Or is it one where just because I know the conceptually systematic reasons that ESDM program works doesn't mean that I can just sort of pick out the parts that I like the best? Or I mean, what are your thoughts there?
I think it's awesome. I think for someone who's not paying attention, you have a pretty good handle on what we're talking about here.
That's what they said. I'm paying complete attention. All right.
To reinforce that behavior. But yeah, I think one of the reasons I really love the Early Start Denver model is I view autism first and foremost as a social disorder. So we need to really think about how can social behavior be established through interactions with other people and to achieve those interactions and connections with other people when those interactions are not naturally reinforcing. And what we're talking about really is, understanding that social motivation matters. So ESDM, the whole focus of their approach, the back kind of conceptualization is we're looking at targeting social engagement and motivation to increase the saliency of the social rewards, us people, within those interactions. So this strategy based in this particular model is all about looking at social attention and motivation and thinking about how those early onset impairments, or we could say differences in social attention that we have with children with autism, they set into motion these developmental processes that deprive or limit the child of adequate social learning experiences. So their whole thing is step into the spotlight, two to tango. It's all about the relationship back and forth because they base it on the theory of the social motivation focus for autism. So that theoretical framework really kind of gets back to that if we don't have a child who's attending and motivating, there's likely going to be cascading effects on their social development because the number of opportunities they have to learn from others, which is where the learning is happening, is diminished or decreased. And we don't have that as much. So I really love NDBIs and specifically the ESDM because they talk a lot about in the manual why they do what they do from a conceptually systematic standpoint. If I found a random BCBA at a conference and I asked them, hey, what theory of autism do you use to guide your treatment? I don't know that I'd get an answer that they could reference back to something. So I really love the ESDM because they do paint a picture, a very detailed portrait, if you will, of why everything is important and how it builds on it to get to the outcomes. I'm not sure if that answered the question or if I went off on a tangent.
And those social opportunities beget language opportunities.
Yes.
And imitation opportunities and connection opportunities as well. And social interaction can look a lot of different ways too, right? So we're not saying that it has to be that you're sitting there making eye contact with one another, but it's much bigger and broader than that and can contribute in multiple ways to overall learning.
Yes. And then those cascading effects again, which are prominent in a lot of the NDBIs, just like what you're talking about, they play a foundational role for later development, especially social development with autism. So those joint attention bids, pointing and sharing, those are subsequent for learning, right? You got to have imitation, shared and reciprocal engagement, gestures, all of those really important pre-linguistic skills that I don't know if you picked up. I guess it would depend on your curriculum guide. So maybe you use a VB map or an ABLES-R or a PEAK. Some of the things that I'm looking for those pre-linguistic behaviors, they don't even flag up on level 1 of those assessments. So I love the Early Start Denver model curriculum checklist because it's all about social behaviors, again, at the level that we're looking at, very minutiae. And there's another one, Carolina curriculum for infants and toddlers. They go way back, peel it back to the very foundational levels of engagement and learning. That's not specific for children with autism, but it's a great book. And there's a preschool version of it as well, curriculum guide, if you need ideas to come up with that. So I think NDBIs really help us focus on those early social learning behaviors in that communicative intent. So identifying echolalia and scripting and pulling somebody by the hand, that's communication. And maybe we move into more emerging skills such as fleeting glances or eye contact or word approximations, which then move us into target skills, which are the words and the phrases and the coordination of all of that. So I think NDBIs, because we work with such young children, I think it's important for staff to understand that developmental trajectory. If you think the kid is going to start manding with one word eye contact at 2 years old and they have none of those foundational skills, everyone will be set up for a failure and there will not be a lot of successes to celebrate because that's not developmentally appropriate for that child. And that is chronologically too. That doesn't mean they're developmentally too. So I think NDBIs really focus on the play and the motivation behind all of these learning opportunities. And they bring to the table the developmental scope and sequence that you might not find in a traditional ABA program.
So, Jamie, when it comes to practicing an NDBI, let's say, ESDM, I've been a behavior analyst for a while. I took a child development course back in my psychology undergrad, right? These concepts, they all sound very, I understand them. I've used them in various fashions over the years. I want to start using this. Is it as simple as I just need the book because I need, I just want the manualized part to help me with my efficiency of setting up my targets? Or is there more that needs to go into the training I need to receive or the supervision I need to receive to start saying I practice Early Start Denver model? Like just logistically, what is that process like?
Yeah, I think it depends. It's funny, when I moved to Albania, Varet, it depends. My first phrase in Albanian, Varet, I needed to know, I need to say it depends. So I think it depends on the clinician, but I definitely think with anything new, a mentor is always helpful. So the great thing is there are numerous resources available about NDBIs if you kind of know where to look or are proficient at Googling. So if you wanted project impact information, there's an awesome manual. There's online courses, beginner and advanced, and they have a certification program. So you could read the book, probably pick it up and kind of put it into practice. But if you really wanted to become proficient, it would be helpful to have somebody who was trained or certified in the model to give you that feedback, which I think is fantastic that there are these programs available to really kind of make sure that we are at fidelity. This is another reason that I love NDBI is they have these certification programs to really uphold the standards to a high quality. Same for PRT, published books and manuals, certification levels up to, I think, number 5. Jasper has their new manual, online, on-site courses, certification program, and then ESDM, which I've spent many moons getting into. I still have a mentor that I see and work with, and just anytime you can have that extra input, I think it helps. But I don't think that there's anything that's needed more, or there's no expectation to more training for NDBIs. So I guess I don't see the amount of staff training and support for NDBIs as any more than you would find or should expect in a traditional ABA program. So we should have those fidelity measures for implementing strategies, treatment modification happening during supervision or overlap sessions, and that ongoing coaching and support for technicians as needed. So I don't think it's any more cumbersome to do that. If anything, I feel like they really do a good job in their manuals of laying out what it is to do the Yellow Book, the parent-friendly version of here it is, An Early Start for Your Child with Autism by Rogers Dawson and Vismara. That is my favorite book in the entire world of all of my books that have traveled with me. It's designed for parents, but it is a godsend for professionals who need to learn how to play. It sequences everything in such a step-by-step fashion with check-ins and activities and ideas. Again, super affordable to find on Amazon or Guilford Press. But I think you could pick that up and be able to implement it. And I like that you said you had a child development course. Maybe that's where the mentorship would come in. Like, hey, I'm rusty. Maybe I just need some guidance on developing the scope and sequence of the learning objectives. Because as a behavior analyst, I know you're all about social validity and what's applied. You have those 7 dimensions. So I think it depends on the context and training for the individual. I still take courses and I still try to keep up on it because it's a lot. It's a whole degree. Do you know what I mean? Like it's a whole other area of expertise. That's where I go for my mentor. Does this work? What would be the cascading effects for this? And I've been doing this a long time. I'm also a lifelong learner. So that just might be me biased of loving to learn.
That's the theme of our show too, Jamie. So you're in the right place with that.
These are my people.
So I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about the Rogers et al. Randomized control trial study, because I think for all of us, we're sort of in DBIs. They're great. There's so many components there that work. We love them. But I do really love the idea of, 2 behavioral interventions enter, only one can leave, kind of that you might get from an RCT. Though I did find that
I like that. It sounds like it's like Fight Club.
It's Thunderdome. You got to put your interventions beyond Thunderdome, right? And it was definitely one of those studies where, part of you is like, which one am I practicing more of? Oh God, what if that one comes out to be that's the crummier one and my whole worldview will crumble. But this study was not that at all. I'm not sure if the authors kind of expected those were going to be the results, because it was ESDM kind of versus, a work in progress from Leaf and McKecken, and just, all right, what happens? They looked at, okay, will one be better for children with kind of more sort of symptoms of autism? What if we use 15 versus, I think it was like 15 to 25 hours? Is there maybe one's better with short dosage, one's better with more dosage? I'm curious if they were expecting the results that they got, or if they were really expecting to have a knockdown drag out. Well, I'm taking my name off this this article because my thing came out as the worst of the 2. I mean, yeah, I kind of want to talk about those results. I mean, do we want to do more background as to the setup, or did I do okay in kind of giving everyone the
I think you did. So they had 4 quadrants basically where they were comparing EIBI at 2 levels of intensity, 15 hours a week and 25 hours a week, and 2 quadrants of ESDM, 15 hours a week and 25 hours a week. So this harkens back to the Howard et al. 2005 study in which they were comparing EIBI and a kind of like a treatment as usual group, but also at 2.
It was like the best intentions program. They were really trying hard to just do right by the
like
kids.
what was generally available to you in your EI program, but that was also looking at 2 different levels of intensity as best that they could. And they really found that, the piece where you were getting not just more hours, but behaviorally focused intervention was ultimately more beneficial. So this is kind of like a new improved comparison between the 2 where they had a lot more control and they were looking at 2 different behavioral groups. But that question about intensity is really important and of the moment.
Absolutely. And I know I've read this article 3 times and I scratch my head every time and I look for additional paper. Am I missing something? Like it was not at all what I expected to read. So I put some notes down here, kind of the significant kind of findings for me that were really interesting were, there were no significant differences across groups in terms of the participant characteristics. All of the children made gains on all outcome variables. The treatment style had no effect on any of the dependent variables. Yeah. And their baseline autism severity didn't moderate the effects of the treatment style or the hours. So you just wouldn't think it would have come out that way. So I remember reading it and looking at their hypothesis about what they thought the reason was. And they had summarized it up essentially to both of the treatments modified the delivery style in specific converging ways. So, for example, in the more adult-directed, structured EIBI treatment, during the breaks from the instruction, the children had naturalistic play and engagement and child-led episodes. And in the more child-led ESDM treatment, there was additional structure kind of built in. So I think when we're talking about services for young children with autism, we're converging towards a unified model that needs to be adjusted to the unique learning needs of each child. And one of the things that they talk about is maybe it's not the quote unquote brand name of the intervention that's important. Maybe it's that those more general characteristics of the high quality interventions. And they highlighted 4 points: manualized evidence-based procedures, blending of those developmental behavioral science techniques, treatment fidelity measures, and integrating those treatment needs into everyday activities. So I'm with you. I read it, and I thought, I was really expecting one to come out. And then I thought maybe this is a very politically correct article. So you want to get along nicely. But it was a fascinating read. So definitely have people chew into that one. I think that's a great wine pairing article.
On the one hand, I was super excited to get, there was no significant, effect for one versus the other. It is kind of that, like it's that politically correct, like everyone wins, right? But on the other hand, I mean, wasn't a part of you sort of like, well, y'all cheated, you took your manual and then you picked the parts from the other model that you're like, well, these are good, I'm going to use these. They shouldn't have been allowed to do that if they really wanted to know the answer. Like, no, I'm sorry, you can't structure your play. No, I'm sorry, you can't play with the children. It's not allowed. That's not what the manual said. I'm sure the manual has lots of room for individualization. I'm being a bit hyperbolic here in my critique.
There's just not a lot of comparisons of strictly ABA EIBI type programs versus NDBIs. It just doesn't exist, I think, for multiple extraneous variables and reason, right? So this is the closest that I've seen to having a semi-controlled study, right? Where they tried to kind of account for everything. And then you still get that really interesting outcome from it. Then I also think, I wonder if it depends on what your focus is for the outcome variables. Like you said, we're focusing on this. So these strategies make sense. We're focusing on that. Those strategies map onto that. One of the things that's great about the ESTM, and I'm assuming or presuming for some kind of progressive kind of ABA programs, it's that whole clinical decision-making model. So within the ASTM book, the blue book, the clinical one, there's decision-making tree guidelines for when
Diana loves those.
Yeah, for when they're not making progress. So it gives you that systematic method for varying a reinforcer, a teaching technique, a support. And again, it's made if a child's not making progress, however you define that. So if the kid needs more structure, you give it. If they need an extrinsic versus intrinsic reinforcer, you offer it. And it just kind of highlights that there's no one important teaching approach for the kid at any given time. It depends on all things within the environment with those children and setting events and reinforcement and motivation. And sometimes structure is better, sometimes structure is less. And I think that's hard for newbies who want a protocol and a guide. I do it 5 times this way and then I do that. I don't think that can work very well within an NDBI type model. But the decision-making trees give you those parameters to really help kind of keep it systematic, but with flex, if that makes points.
Yeah, I think that my big take home from the article, other than as long as you're using one of these and the quality is there, you should be okay, was, hey, I probably want to invest more on that systematic component of some of the decision making, like get both manuals and pick out what you like, but have something that allows for that assistance with decision making. Because I think it's a skill that most BCBAs who have any quality can certainly do, but it does start becoming hard to make sure that you're always following that quality. If you're sort of just, I'll get to it when I get to it, or I'll think about when I think of it. Like, you can do it, but when you're trying to scale up a program where you have multiple staff who are working with multiple students, it's probably a good idea to have some of that written out to take a little bit of the load off of your decision making requirements, so you can just focus on the key pieces that aren't going well and analyzing the data rather than the nitty gritty of the day to day, which takes its own set of skills.
One way I talk to my students about this too is that we have an ethical code, and part of that ethical code is that we're providing services in the least restrictive setting. And I talked to them about, setting could be a place, but it can also be the environment that we create, right, for our services. So if we think about what that environment looks like, we should not always default to we're going to sit at the table and do DTT together, right? And if you think about that as a more restrictive setting than something that's, naturally arranged, then it can be part of your hierarchy of potentially available, learning environments, but it's not the one you first go to, right? Before that, you can look at how you might arrange the environment that is more naturally occurring and developmentally appropriate. And if you're finding that learning can't occur there for whatever reason, then you have, reason to move to something that is more structured. Because for some kids, that is what's needed at the time to learn. It doesn't mean it's always going to look like that either. But we have a responsibility to teach to the individual child in the least restrictive setting.
Absolutely. And then same thing with activities, kind of tagging on with what you have there. I would do Play-Doh at the table. I don't want to pick it out of the carpet. I wouldn't be kicking a ball at the table. I'd be running around for that. So I think it depends on the context, like you said, environment or setting, but also the context of your activity and your items. What are you doing? Does it make sense to sit and kind of bounce up and down at a table and tickle, or should you be somewhere else where you have more freedom for the kid to come and approach you? So you get that communicative intent. They put their arms up. Maybe they point, they make an approximation. That's hard to do when you're sitting at a table. Yeah. But there are other things like coloring that are hard to do on the go. So I think it's that consideration of what are you trying to teach, or what is the outcome of what you're doing, or what is the purpose of the goals you're setting, and then what is the best setting, location, what are the best activities, or I call those the cracker. So just the vessel that all the good teaching kind of comes in. And then how do you align that to the child's attention, motivation, and reinforcement at any given time? And that gets really busy when you're trying to juggle all of that, I think, for sure. There was an article that I found. I think I sent it to you guys later. If not, I'll send it over. And it makes me think about, like, how do I know what to do, or a decision-making process, or if I was going to give feedback to a technician. And it's a 2020. All of these are just hot off the press. So good. Frost and colleagues.
Oh.
And do you know this one?
Yes, I was going to bring it up if you didn't. Yeah.
That's new to me. I just stumbled across that one a few months ago. So it's identifying, they can't have a short name, identifying and measuring the common elements of naturalistic developmental behavioral interventions for autism spectrum disorder, development of the NDBI FI like fidelity.
Yes.
I thought that was really cool, because you don't have to be explicitly trained in NDBIs. You just have to have some kind of awareness of it. It's super user-friendly and can be administered by a non-expert, as long as, again, you have some kind of familiarity with NDBIs. But what was really cool, too, is they have these, jump in anytime you want, they have these kind of different general items. So they look at consistency of certain skills. They look at an as needed. So for consistency, are you always face-to-face, following the child's lead, positive affect, animation? Those should be happening regardless of anything going on. Then they have a different criteria for, I believe it was as needed. So the frequency of adult behaviors as needed or proportional. You're not doing those the entire duration that you're with that kiddo. Mm-hmm. So responding to attempts or quality of direct teaching. And then they had a frequency measure. So the use of communicative temptations or the frequency of direct teaching episodes. So these are like discrete things that a staff is doing that you can count during a session. And I think that's really helpful to identify, are you observing an NDBI session versus something different? And are you getting the fidelity of those interventions? And it's, I don't want to say generic. General, what's the word I'm looking for? It's widespread enough that it covers any of the NDBI models, right? It's not specific to just one. And it has a really cool 5-point rating scale that you can use for the fidelity. So kind of thinking about behavioral anchor rating scales, kind of moving in that direction. There's not a lot of numbers to pinpoint things, but I think you could definitely kind of customize that and look at it. So if we were trying to figure out, how do I know if I'm doing an NDBI program or seeing one, we should have those common components. We should see that there's, teaching based on the principles of ABA. We should have some developmentally appropriate strategies, and should be some kind of fidelity measure going on. So what did you think of that article, Diana?
I thought it was useful in the same way that it kind of brought together, similar to how you had the 13 points, right? It brought together these overarching expectations that you would see within different NDBI programs. And Jackie, you and I had some students who sort of took that list, remember?
Mm-hmm.
And then worked to teach components of that to new RBTs.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah. We're in the process with that one, I guess you could say.
One was really effective, yeah.
Do you find technicians are more acceptable or welcome to these types of teaching strategies, or the terminology? Or all my technicians come in to me and it's NDBI from the get-go. They don't really, you know what I mean? So compared to something else, I guess I'm not sure what it's compared to. Is that something they feel comfortable with because it's spelled out for them and it's warm and fuzzy and conceptually?
I think what is challenging about teaching folks how to do NDBI is that it is much less spelled out for them than the DTT approach. And many technicians, I think, gravitate toward the DTT approach because it's clear what they need to do. And they feel like they have a high level of success in kind of getting like the TA of the session correct, right? Yeah. Whereas with NDBI, it's like all over the place. And you're like, just like,
play,
go have fun, right? And that's really hard to do, is to figure out how to set up those learning opportunities in the context of play, monitoring the child's interest, incorporating naturally occurring reinforcers as you can, but supplementing if that's not working, creating yourself as a reinforcer, and then targeting, 25 different developmentally appropriate language and communication skills all at once. That's not easy to do.
No, it's a toddler who's gone by the time you figure it out.
Exactly. Yeah. So you're trying to figure out how to break that down into components that technicians can do and feel successful at doing is really critical. So I liked that for that reason. It broke down some of that, and we were able to approach it, piece by piece. And that was really helpful for those RBTs. So I'll say that, but it is a whole different skill set.
Yeah. I wonder if this would be interesting for your guys' work, if there were certain components of that were more important than other ones. And I don't know how you would define more important or measure that. So is it important that we're face to face with the child, right, all the time? Is it all about encouraging communication, or is it the pace and frequency of teaching? That would be interesting. And I think that's what some of the research is kind of alluding to. What are those things that make NDBI so effective for this population? How do we tease it out? So we have to start somewhere, so we don't have parents or professionals that are overwhelmed with trying to learn a new language or a new system to applying everything. For me, it's all about attention and motivation and engagement. Yeah. So that's where I start. And it's all about honing and finessing that, because if those three variables are off, then it doesn't matter about quality and frequency of teaching. You don't have a ready learner to go. One of the things that's really cool about the ESDM that I think can also help technicians are their joint activity routines. So there's a 4-part framework to them. We have a setup, a theme, a variation, and a close. So we roll through that. We shut it down. We open another one. And they're continuous cycles of learning. And they really give some structure to something that doesn't feel like it has structure, if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah. Yeah. After reading about the ESDM, I created kind of like, I think I called it a new student schedule for students in the program I worked in. And it had for our technicians how to like go through like 10 different things. And it was like a gross motor activity. And these are the types of things you might target during that. A song routine. And these are the things you target during that. Reading a story together. Perfect. An arts and crafts activity, right? A fine motor activity, and it would help them just kind of structure their time in that way. And then I would identify for them within each of these activities, these are all the different things that you might be targeting, not limited to, but including imitation skills, functional communication skills, those types of, early early learner manding and closed phrase opportunities, all of those things. So I listed them out in that way. And so that was something that I'm not trained in ESDM, but in going to some early presentations on them, I was able to kind of add in that type of structure to what would otherwise be a very unstructured, just go play session. And I found it really helpful.
I love it because I know when I would get new staff and they'd be at the table and I'd say, just go play, they'd just stare like deer in the headlight or crickets. And they just look at me like, what do you want me to do? And I'm like, well, have fun would be, go have fun. And the table and that binder is just such an SD for learning for them. And I'm like, it's harder for them to leave the comfort of the table where they have instructional quote unquote control versus going off into the wild environment with a toddler who's running around rampant. But I love the structure. I've done that for flashcards, like flip cards. Here's 5 green and speckled frogs. Here's 20 ideas. Now map it on to the child's learning objectives, thinking about your strategies and make the magic happen. I love the thought of really spelling it out for them conceptually so that they feel support. So there's play with the purpose. I think maybe that's go play with the purpose as opposed to just go play. And you are giving them the purpose by giving them some prompts and some scaffold to kind of support them as they go. That's awesome.
Well, I think it is time. We're gonna do something special. Well, it's not totally time. We got a couple minutes left, but we have. I don't want to stop learning about NDBIs, but also it's just one episode of a show. We have lots of other resources. I don't think everyone will learn everything they need to know just here, but hopefully it has piqued some interest. Speaking of piquing interests, that's a bad segue. We have a new segment of the show. It's brand new. We didn't know we were doing it till right before we started recording when Diana said, we're doing a new segment of the show. So Diana, please bring us into this new segment of the show. Yes, I'm
very excited to announce that we have a new segment of the show, and I have titled the new segment Pairings. And in this segment, I'm going to tell you 2 things. I'm going to tell you kind of like recommendations for if you liked this episode. Very often there will be other episodes of our very own podcast that you can go back to if you want to learn more or you kind of liked this style. So I'm going to tell you what those are. And then I'm also going to tell you a potential food or drink pairing that I think would go well. I guess it's going to be hard for you to now listen to the episode and enjoy the food or drink because the episode is almost over. So we might have to workshop that
fast.
Go listen to it again.
Listen again. Okay, but first of all, so if you enjoyed this episode, we do have some others that you might like to go back and listen to and learn more. First of all, this is not Dr. Hughes Lika's first time on the show. She joined us back in episode 63 in the Wayback Machine, and that was an episode on supervision. So if you liked hearing Jamie talk and want to also do a supervision one, you can go back and check that out. If you would like to hear more on the topic that is similar to NDBIs, then you can listen to our episode 84, in which we discuss early intensive behavioral intervention. Or you might also potentially enjoy episode 130, in which we talk about early indicators of ASD.
So, Diana, did you want to add this segment to the show because you have just had to stare at the catalog of the show for so long that you're like, I got to put this information somewhere else?
Well, because very often during the show, at one point, I'll be like, and don't forget that we also talked about this in this episode 57 or whatever it might be. So you want to do it at
one specific time rather than just blurting it out at random times.
Yes, exactly. So I wanted to add it for that reason.
So this is like a self-management technique, this new segment of the show.
Well, I was hoping it might help listeners. Find the episodes. And then if I'm really on my game, maybe I'll also infographic it. So that they're like a bundled thing.
All right. And then what would you pair with this episode?
Oh, I know. So, Rob's suggestion, and I think I'll take it for this episode since I did create the segment on the fly. His suggestion to enjoy with an NDBI episode would be a Shirley Temple.
It was actually Jackie's suggestion.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just seconded
I'm so sorry.
I seconded the motion.
What was I thinking?
I like Shirley Temples. I'm not going to call him a Roy Rogers, folks. I'm cool with the fact that I want Roy Shirley Temple.
I thought that was with the Coke.
No, Roy Rogers is what you call it's the gendered version of the Shirley Temple, I believe.
Is this true?
I got nothing to add to that.
I may be wrong, but I'm pretty sure
Roy Rogers was a Coke with a cherry.
It's possible. Listeners, write in. Very important.
So to make a Shirley Temple, you should take some Sprite and add some cherries.
Like, you have a grenadine.
Oh yeah, and some I don't even know. Yeah, some grenadine to make it pink. This is an enjoyable drink for young and old alike, and it really brings fun to the cocktail scene while keeping it appropriate for all ages. And I think that is what NDBI is really all about.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. That's an amazing way.
Pro tip, if you want to add some more, language and communication opportunities, don't put the cherries in there, but have them around the room. And then you can go find them. You can imitate opening the jar.
Oh, okay.
Lots of great opportunities.
All right. So that's pairings. Thank you.
Bottle cheers, when you're done, and just enjoy your beverage.
Oh boy.
All right. Well, new segment. Let's go into our old segment. Our old last segment, the dissemination station. We're all just on the side, we got our Shirley Temples, we're on the train. So, Jamie, it was a big topic episode, right?
A lot to cover.
So unlike, say, if we're talking about, one specific intervention, when we're sort of getting to this section where we talk about, like, kind of what's a good take-home point for listeners, there's not going to be just one, like, oh, this is the way to do it, and here's how to do NDBIs, and now you're all set, right? So I guess it would be more a matter of, if one were not already using NDBIs, they're not already doing Early Start Denver model or Jasper or one of the, any of the other NDBIs out there, and they said, I want to either get more information, or I want to take some of these pieces, much like in the Rogers et al. Study. I want to take some of these pieces and put them into my current kind of early intervention, or behavior interventions. I want to take some of that stuff. What would you recommend to folks? Like, what are the pieces that they should be making sure that they kind of add to their more traditional ABA practice?
I think the developmental teaching procedures that NDBIs bring, the D in the NDBI, and really getting the books, like you said, just going out and getting the book. There might be ebooks out there. You can find a lot on YouTube, kind of vet to see the authors of who's out there, to really think about what are these developmental approaches and these strategies and how we can benefit from them and learn from them. So I really feel like this is not... NDBIs and EIBI are not mutually exclusive. I feel like they can work very well together. And I think they are better together, especially for infants and toddlers with autism. So I really hope that this podcast episode has helped kind of present a viewpoint that they can coexist together, and to really kind of move the needle in that direction, to think about some of those strategies, picking up the NDBI FI. You can find that online. Go get that and check out what the fidelity items are, and kind of look at what that is in terms of NDBI fidelity for those awesome teaching strategies that are there. So I think picking up any of the manuals and kind of learning about the theory about why they do something, and then picking up a fidelity measure and being able to kind of chew on it and digest it and see how it happens in practice is going to be a good start. But then I love what Diana had talked about with the strategies for supporting staff, of breaking it down and really giving them support so that they can implement it. I think that'll be another really good addition to, I love this, I want to learn more, I want to roll out there and do it, while kind of taking considerations for what do we know about autism and how it impacts our littlest learners? What developmental strategies do we have? And how do we bring that all together, which we do so well in NDBIs, to, again, move the needle and start going in that direction for the little ones? I looked for NDBIs at ABAI. If you search their catalog, I think I found 3 in all of the years for presentations. So it's a great topic for people to do research on. More of those studies that kind of compare and contrast, or component studies. I think it's a great thing for professionals in the field to learn from what the developmental science brings us. It's amazing to do NDBIs, and I can't do anything else. I see it, and it's so effective, and it's so fun. I can never go back to a more traditional model. I've just been shaped, right?
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, Dr. Jamie Hughes-Lika, thank you so much for coming on the show again and telling us all about NDBIs. If folks want to reach out to you to kind of ask you questions, or to, help with the resources or suggestions of, where they can look next, is there a good place they can contact you?
Yeah, they can send an email to Dr. Jamie, Jamie, at Sage Learning Systems I have a bunch of really cool show notes. I can send the show notes over. I typed up some more stuff. And then the visuals that I sent over, I think those are super helpful. So we've got a bunch of courses on it. We have an 11-hour course on NDBIs, 11 hours. I can't cut it.
Wow.
So, there's tons of resources available, and those are really great CEU courses to check out as well. So they're happy to do that at Sage Learning Lab. That's our learning lab for all of that stuff. So there's a cool resource for them too. So it's good. I hope it inspires somebody to go out and do more research or take this and roll with it the next day for their programs. And it's just a delight to chat with you all.
Oh, thank you so much,
too.
Jamie.
Thank you.
Big thanks to Dr. Jamie Hughes-Lika for coming back on the show. It is shocking that our show has been on long enough that we have guests that are coming back to be on it again. I think Jamie's not even the first. So it's so exciting to catch up with folks and then to hear more about the research and what they've been working on since the last time they were on the show. Hopefully you all liked the new pairing segment so you can sort of hear some of those past links or past information. And hopefully you learned a lot about NDBIs that perhaps you did not already know. Before we wrap up, I have a couple other people I want to thank. I want to start with all of you listeners. Thank you so much for listening and supporting ABA Inside Track. We'd really appreciate it if you subscribed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you like to get podcasts. Maybe even think of leaving us a review on any of these platforms. You can go to our website, abainsidetrack.com, to find links to all of the articles discussed on this episode, as well as some links to all of our older episodes and to purchase CEs. You can find us on all the socials as ABA Inside Track. You can find these episodes posting every week on our YouTube site with the YouTube subtitling feature. And if you want even more ABA Inside Track content, go to patreon.com/ABA Inside Track, where for just $5 a month, you can get all these episodes ahead of time, as well as get access to our live recording episodes and to vote on some of the topics that we do. Each season, we do an episode that's a listener vote one. We just did visual support, and you're able to get a CE for free for each of those live episodes. And if you want even longer content, maybe on the subject of books related to behavior analysis, you can join us at the $10 level for the ABA Inside Track Book Club, where you gain access to our seasonal book clubs. We're actually, at the time of this recording, we just wrapped up our discussion Between Now and Dreams by Dr. Eli Rosales and Peggy Henkel-Wolf, all about parenting. It's a parenting book for parents of autistic children or youths or adolescents. We had a lot of fun discussing that. Again, that's patreon.com/ABA Inside Track. And some other big thanks again to Dr. Jamie Hughes-Lika. Big thanks to Dr. Jim Carr for recording our intro and outro music, Kyle Sturria for our interstitial music, and Dan Thabit of the Podcast Doctors for his amazing editing work. And don't think I forgot that second secret code word. Here it is. It's social. SOCIAL. You could be talking about social skills, or perhaps you're taking your partner to a box social, whatever that might be. I think that's an old Simpsons joke reference. Social. We'll be back next week with another full-length episode, but until then, keep responding. Bye!